Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The leaders of Syria and Turkey are not, in fact, identical twins. Erdogan has been in power for more than 2 decades already and suffers no challenges to his autocratic regime. Al-Julani has ruled Damascus and some other parts of the country for less than 5 months and has difficulty in holding sway over all the provinces and ethnic groups. What they do have in common, however, is their Sunni Islamist ideology, which Erdogan is pushing with a militant and vehemently anti-Israeli passion, while Al-Julani is going for the more discreet approach in order to gain foreign recognition and relief. Can the Ankara-Aleppo axis, having one of its poles now in Damascus, keep going without the building of unbearable tension? Joining us for the discussion include Dr. Chaitan Konyan-Arochak, who is a researcher at the Moshe Dayan Center and the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. It's great to see you, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Also joining us is Colonel in Reserve Dr. Hanan Wehebe, who is a research fellow at the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University, as well as a lecturer at Haifa University. It's great to see you as well, sir.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening indeed, and with us here in the studio is our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, set the stage for us.
So, Jonathan, we tend to extrapolate from seminal events into the present and then, of course, the future. And I'm reminded of a historical example. When the State of Israel was established, the Soviet Union was one of its main supporters and even sponsors, diplomatically and militarily, not sending troops, but making sure that Israel has the equipment, the arms through Czechoslovakia and other places. But soon enough, Israel has reoriented itself towards the West and especially the United States. The Turks, of course, were behind Al-Julani and HTS as they started their march from the north, Aleppo, Idlib, towards Damascus. And of course, the Turks have their interests, especially in the north, in the border areas, and especially against the Kurds. But it doesn't mean that the new Syrian regime is still committed, still dependent, or still wants to be considered a pawn of the Turks. And therefore, there could be friction between the two as Al-Julani, Ahmed A-Shara, tries to maneuver between the various forces, including Israel, which is now in a proactive forward deployment position in the southwestern part of Syria.
Indeed, just to establish this, since Al-Julani heading currently Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or the interim government, so to speak, of Damascus, but nonetheless Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is the subsequent evolution of Jabhat al-Nusra, an organization initially formed for the Islamic State, subsequently transitioning to Al-Qaeda, Salafist, in essence, Wahhabist, and jihadist proactively. So, on the other hand, Turkey is Islamist in nature. Muslim Brotherhood, of course, is a statement made by many, but nonetheless, the Muslim Brotherhood is a vanguard organization, quote unquote, for political Islam, something that they're pushing in multiple countries, including in Western civilization, where we see parties like Denk in the Netherlands or Ilhan Omar in the Congress, people promoting the vanguard political Islam within those societies, which is both a strong suit of these organizations, but also a weakness. But nonetheless, I'd like to start with you, Colonel Wehebe. When we're talking about the complexities of Abu Muhammad al-Julani, also known as Ahmed A-Shara, we know that this man, during his Al-Qaeda years, used to be the pragmatic sort of operational proceedings within their jihadist aspirations. Jabhat al-Nusra, which he formed is actually the Arabic term for the organization that seeks to conquer the Levant. For all intents and purposes, to include Jordan, to include Israel. And therefore, since he lost control of the Golan region during the time when his terror organization was situated there, he reached an agreement with Bashar al-Assad and was diverted to the Idlib governorate, where Turkish intelligence utilized the diminished capacity of al-Qaeda to support him in order to basically force him to affiliate with Turkey and basically the more Islamist line, which is similar, maybe in reverse, to what happened to Ansar Beit al-Maqdis in Egypt, which used to be part of the Muslim Brotherhood under Muhammad Morsi, but when the coup occurred and Abdel Fattah al-Sisi took over and designated the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, they went and pledged allegiance to the Islamic State, transforming into the more Salafist, jihadist aspirations that they currently employ. To what degree is that complexity challenging the relationship between Damascus and Ankara, as Mr. Oren just mentioned?
Yeah, I think that this track that you have mentioned can tell us the very simple story that one of the basic method of those organizations, the Islamist political organization, is pragmatism. They change somehow their declarations. They adopt new methods in order to achieve their political goals. And this is really the central concern of all parts that are looking at this scenario inside Syria, internally and externally. Everybody is waiting to see to what extent he is real and adopting a new government, changing the atmosphere in Syria. To be much more moderate and open to the different sects and opponents inside the Syrian society. But still, till now, most of the internal sides are still concerned that maybe it's only a tactical declarations, and behind that there is still a very Islamic radical tendency of this regime. And we can hear also the voices from the Arab neighboring states like Jordan, for example, and in particular Egypt, that are opposing totally this kind of Islamic regime that might come with a very, very negative ramifications to the other regimes in the region, and of course to the stability.
Dr. Konya Narochak, when pre-December 8th, before al-Julani managed to enter with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham into Damascus, Turkey was basically supporting HTS in the onslaught towards Damascus, providing them backing, particularly with the Syrian Jaish al-Watani, the Syrian national forces, so to speak. And they put those Jaish al-Watani forces in between Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and the Kurdish forces for fear that HTS would somehow stab them in the back during that process, not totally giving them trust, but rather being very cautious of those activities. Naturally, they didn't want their own proxy, Jaish al-Watani, to consolidate power in Damascus because they do have their aspirations in Africa, and this is a type of Wagner force, if I may call it that way, in order to operate all kind of aspirations that were initially laid out in 2012 by the then Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu. But when we're talking about the current complexities of relations between Ankara and Damascus, despite all of the mistrust, Ankara needs Damascus and needs HTS due to economic reasons and also the capacity to project power outside of its own borders. Is it not so?
So first of all, I would like to underline that, in my opinion, of course, the Syrians need Turkey more than Turkey needs Syria. At the end of the day, I would like to remind you that the first ever visit of a foreign personality in Syria was of the Turkish intelligence agency's head, Ibrahim Kalın. And later we all witnessed that Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan paid another visit. And all of a sudden, we began to see our leader, El-Julani, began to dress like a civilized Western leader with a tie and a jacket. So I assume that this is a Turkish strategy of projecting Syria as a new acceptable party in the international arena. And the core reason for that is you also mentioned when you asked this question that Turkey needs Syria. For instance, why Turkey needs Syria? To rebuild Syria, Turkey would like to operate inside Syria with its subcontractors. This will definitely pour lots of money into the fragile Turkish economy. It will pour lots of hot money. And I would like to remind you, these subcontractors are considered as Mr. Erdogan's most important financial supporters at home. So he will also satisfy his most important supporters at home. And besides that, he would also project power to the Turkish people that Turkey penetrates into Syria more and more. And he will increase the interdependency with the Syrians. And not only that, not only building new buildings, Turkey is also talking about building very comprehensive infrastructure projects, ranging from paving new railroads, paving new highways, and upgrading the current airports and providing radars, etc., etc. So all of these things, these projects that were declared in an open way by the Turkish ministries, basically signaling me that Turkey is willing to penetrate more and more into Syria, and it is hugging Syria even more. So please show me another state who is willing to invest in Syria as much as Turkey. You will not be able to show me another state as much as Turkey. And also, I would like to remind you that there is a geographical proximity. Turkey has, a border with Syria, and in addition to that, Turkey is still is considered as an occupying force in the portions of northern Syria. Turkey did not leave Syria. The portions of land like Jarablus, Afrin, Tel El Abyad, Ras El Ain are still under Turkish occupation. So Turkey can also, in a way, can blackmail the Syrian government because they are still there. And nowadays, we are also reading in the press that they are willing to increase their penetration, deepen their penetration by integrating new army bases. So, given this whole picture, I think that the Turks are creating here an irreversible dependency for the Syrians. And also when I'm looking at the Syrian cabinet, I can also see the influence of the Syrians who were living inside Turkey, who have a command in Turkish language. So when I'm looking at all this picture, I think Syrians are much more dependent to Turkey than Turkey dependent to Syria.
When you say investments, however, one thing comes to mind: Turkey doesn't have the funds to invest. And therefore, it does utilize, of course, Qatar for a certain degree, the Europeans with their donor conference, who seek to return all the refugees, of course, into Syria, are more than willing. But the United States is not buying this facade, and it is maintaining the Caesar Act full force, minus maybe the energy aspect and a couple of humanitarian angles that are marginal at best. And in that context, from my conversations with the different individuals in the Trump administration, they pretty much look at the HTS as Al-Qaeda, with just recently the senior director for countering terrorism at the National Security Council, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, coming out and not even referring them as HTS, but Jabhat al-Nusra.
Well, the other day, earlier this week, there was the confirmation hearing for General Dan Kane, the nominee for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he was asked, what about the American military presence in Syria? Are you going to diminish it? And he said, the only reason we are there is the fight against ISIS. If we reassess that there is no need for our footprint there, we will, of course, realign it. As, of course, President Trump's policy is to lessen the presence in the Middle East. Now, when al-Julani looks next door at Iraq, he sees the cost of decentralizing, what the Americans have done in their de-Ba'athization after they occupied Iraq 22 years ago. And when he presented his cabinet, as Eitan Chai indicated, he made sure to include officials of the former Assad regime among the ministers. Of course, there is also representation. There is a Kurd, there is an Alawite, there is a Druze. But the dilemma...
None of them, of those included, have anything to do with the leaderships of any of those
of course,
communities.
This is the way you pick quote-unquote representatives. But the dilemma for him is that if he wants to have a centralized Syria, he cannot make an exception for the Turks, because then Israel too would like to have a foothold. It cannot be Syria plus Turkish presence. And therefore, he has to toe a very fine line if he survives.
Which is very interesting, since President Erdogan, Colonel Wehbe, he actually wanted and relates to al-Julani that he would like him to invite him into Syria, something that this HTS leader has thus far not done. And it seems like, irrespective of the various calculations at hand, how can you explain that?
Well, we must remember that the Kurds are not part of the new government. And I'm afraid that this interference of the Turks inside Syria is strategic. And it's a double-faced strategy or politics in my reading. On the one hand, they are telling the West that we are the country to contain this terrorism and jihadism and Islamism. It's not the first time that Erdogan did that as a message towards Europe. But on the other hand, internally, I mean, inside the Islamic world, he is trying to give this backing to those Islamists. And via Syria, he will try to dominate the Arab Muslim world, just like the same game that Iran did. This takes me to the understanding that the real competition right now is between Iran and Turkey, those huge Islamist big states, regional states that will be confronting covertly and somehow under the table via their allies in order to dominate this region. This takes us to the understanding that the current situation in Syria, this stability is only now. It might be changed at any moment. And Turkey has a lot of inspiration, not only in Syria. We can see, as it was said before, a lot of inspirations also in the Mediterranean, also in the Red Sea. In Syria right now, there are still 4 militias that are still acting. And one of the basic things that everybody is looking at the result when the new regime will be able to dismantle those militias. And I'm afraid that the Turks still have 4 in Syria, and they have much more in other states around Turkey. It's part of this dream of Erdogan, and it's far from stabilizing now the situation in Syria. We will wait and see. Everybody is waiting, as I said before.
Absolutely. Dr. Koyner Rochak, even though I have 100 questions for you, I'll stick to this one. On Sunday, March 30th, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, during a prayer, during an iftar dinner, came out and stated quite vocally that he's praying that Allah will both destroy and devastate Israel. This, of course, has to do with his frustrations with Israel, not only about Syria, but also about the Gaza Strip, where he's seeing the Islamist Hamas, an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, being eradicated. But nonetheless, it does show a certain face to this leader of a member state of the North Atlantic Alliance, no less, coming out and calling for the annihilation of a member state of the United Nations, very much alike the Ayatollah regime in Tehran.
Well, this is very unfortunate. As you mentioned, the Turkish president, called for the destruction of the state of Israel. Let me make it clear. Also, last year, April, he used the same expression, the word kahar, which means, it's a synonym for God's name in Arabic, which means like the destroyer or the punisher. He also last year called for the destruction of the Netanyahu government and all of the Zionists. So we can, when we are talking about Zionists, of course, we can talk about the vast majority of the Israeli citizens. Therefore, also we can indicate and highlight that also in last year he called for the destruction of the state of Israel. But this year, instead of talking about government, he targeted our state, directly. So, of course, bottom line, we cannot unfortunately differentiate this rhetoric from the Ayatollah regime of Iran. And therefore, you also made a very important reference to Turkey's membership in NATO, which is today shattering. NATO is shattering. We all witnessed the confrontation between US President Donald Trump with his Ukrainian counterpart in the White House. Today, the Europeans are very much afraid of the dissolution of NATO because there is a Russian threat, and they don't want to see Turkey as an additional headache. And therefore, Mr. Erdogan seizes this opportunity. And he's also aware that in NATO, there is no mechanism to kick out the current members. So he knows very well that he will not be kicked out from the alliance because there is no possible way of doing it. Long story short, uh, also as we have seen last year, also this year, this statement of calling the destruction for the state of Israel in Ramadan became a new tradition. But in bottom line, do we see like the Iranians? Do we see any actions against the state of Israel? Thank God, today this is only in rhetoric. However, since we are talking about Turkish penetration inside Syria, we can say that in the very near future, may God forbid, if there will be a real friction between Israel and Turkey in Syria, whether in sea or in the airspace, unfortunately, we may see that all of these statements may turn from rhetoric into reality, and therefore Israel should be very cautious. We have no intention to turn Turkey into an active enemy. We should be very responsible. And I really wish that this word, responsibility, would also mean something in Ankara.
Absolutely. With that being said, and I will note, I don't think Turkey actually wants to get into a fight because it doesn't also want the bad press for its military when we're talking about prospects of confrontation. The United States would back Israel in this context, irrespective of NATO, particularly on the current administration. And with that also being highlighted, that I do not believe that the United States is keen on the dissolution of NATO. I think that managing to force more than 2/3 of NATO members into surpassing the 2% and then even going beyond that to the 3 and 4 is something that is to be expected in the near future. And all the story of the EU trying to replace, or Turkey trying to provide its own candidacy as the leader of NATO. Let's not be delusional about this. The only reason NATO has an interest in Turkey in its alliance is because of the phosphorus, frustrating the Russian capacity under Article 21 of the convention of the treaties convention to go through the straits with military vessels during times of war, something that Turkey has full control over and has continued to play as a good actor when we're talking about the Ukraine theater, and that is very significant. Last minute is yours, Mr. Owen.
Turkey and Greece are, of course, two NATO members at odds with each other and sometimes at loggerheads, especially over Cyprus, but not only. Turkey does not need another adversary, especially as potent as Israel. And one of the best things which happened to Israel, starting 5 years ago, is that Israel is now under CENTCOM rather than under EUCOM. And when it was aspiring for some partnership with NATO, Turkey always blocked, disrupted. Now it doesn't have this power.
Indeed. Well, I will also point out one more thing, and that is the fact that when we're talking about the Israel-Turkey relationship, which has fluctuated over the decades, it always had the core principle that both countries have more to gain than to in such a relationship.
So maybe post-Erdogan it will revert to it.
Possibly. We'll have to wait and see. But this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Dr. Koeniana Rochak and Dr. Anan Webe for all of your valuable insights. And I'd like to thank also you, Mr. Owen.
Thank you.
And all of our viewers, of course, until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.